They told her Americans would tear children from their mothers' arms, that enemy soldiers showed no mercy, especially to German women who had supported the Reich. So when Greta Schmidt heard boots marching toward the prisoners' barracks at Camp Como, Mississippi, in August 1945, she pulled her 3-year-old daughter closer, bracing for the worst. 200 German mothers held their breath that morning. Some clutched infants, others gripped toddlers who didn't understand why their mothers trembled. They had spent weeks on transport ships across the Atlantic, weeks wondering what punishment awaited them in America. But when the American soldier stepped through the door, he wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a teddy bear, and in his other hand, a list of children's names, names of sons and daughters who had been separated from their mothers during the chaos of war. The mothers expected violence. Instead, they got something far more dangerous: kindness. If stories like this move you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true accounts from World War II history. The journey had begun in the smoking ruins of Germany, spring 1945. Greta Schmidt stood in line with hundreds of other women at a displaced persons camp near Frankfurt. She was 28 years old, thin from months of rationed food, her hair pulled back in a faded scarf. Her daughter, little Emma, clung to her worn coat, sucking her thumb. Greta wasn't a soldier. She had been a secretary at a German military supply depot, typing requisition forms and filing paperwork. When the Americans arrived, they classified her as a Wehrmacht auxiliary, technically part of the military infrastructure. That made her a prisoner of war, even though she'd never held a gun. Around her stood nurses, radio operators, truck drivers, telephone switchboard workers. Most were young women, barely out of their 20s, and dozens of them had children, born during the war, often while their husbands fought on distant fronts or lay buried in foreign soil. The American officers moved through the crowds with clipboards, separating families into groups. "You're going to America," they said in broken German, "for processing. You'll be safer there than here." Safer. The word felt like a joke. Germany was broken, yes. Cities bombed to rubble. Food scarce. Chaos everywhere. But America? That was enemy territory. That was the land of monsters, according to the propaganda they'd heard for years. The train ride to the port at Bremerhaven took 2 days. Greta sat in a cramped wooden car with 20 other women and their children. Emma slept fitfully in her lap, whimpering when the train lurched over damaged tracks. Outside the windows, Germany scrolled past like a nightmare. Blackened factories, collapsed bridges, towns reduced to skeletal frameworks. An older woman across from Greta, holding a baby boy, whispered in the darkness, "They say Americans hate us. They say we'll be punished for what Germany did." Another woman, younger, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, added, "My husband told me before he died, if the Americans capture you, they'll separate mothers from children. They'll put us in labor camps." Greta said nothing. She just held Emma tighter. She had heard the same stories. Everyone had. The Reich's propaganda had painted Americans as brutal occupiers who would take revenge on German civilians, especially women and children. At Bremerhaven, the port was chaos. Thousands of displaced persons, prisoners of war, and refugees crowded the docks. Military police directed traffic. Ships loomed in the harbor, gray and imposing under cloudy skies. The women were herded up gangways onto a Liberty ship converted for prisoner transport. The Atlantic crossing took 12 days. The ship's hold was divided into sections, women with children in one area, men in another. The bunks were stacked 3 high, metal frames with thin mattresses. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and human sweat. Many women got seasick. Children cried constantly. Emma developed a fever on the 5th day, and Greta held her through the night, singing lullabies in German, feeling helpless. When the ship finally reached American shores, New Orleans, the women crowded at the railings, staring in disbelief. The city rose before them, buildings intact, streets bustling with cars, streetlights glowing in the evening dusk. There were no craters, no rubble, no burned-out husks of buildings. One woman gasped, "It's untouched, the whole city." Another muttered, "How is this possible? We were told America suffered too. We were told the war hurt everyone." But here was the truth, impossible to deny. America had not been bombed. America had not starved. While Europe tore itself apart, America had grown stronger, richer, more powerful. The realization hit the women like a physical blow. They disembarked slowly, children in arms, walking down the gangway under the watch of American soldiers. Some soldiers looked curious, others looked bored. A few looked sympathetic, especially when they saw the children, small faces, wide eyes, some crying, some too tired to react. Greta held Emma's hand as they stepped onto solid ground for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Her legs felt unsteady. Emma looked around, confused. "Mama, where are we?" "America," Greta whispered. The word felt strange in her mouth, foreign, dangerous. They were loaded onto buses, big, rumbling vehicles with bench seats. The windows showed streets lined with shops, houses with porches, children riding bicycles. Normal life? Peaceful life? Greta couldn't reconcile what she saw with what she had been taught to believe. The journey inland took 2 more days, first by train, then by bus. They traveled through Louisiana, past swamps and small towns where people waved from porches, then into Mississippi, where the summer heat pressed down like a wet blanket. The landscape was green, lush, alive, so different from the gray ruins they'd left behind. Camp Como sat in the countryside, surrounded by fields and forests. It had been built to house Italian and German POWs earlier in the war, but now it was being used for a special purpose, housing German women, prisoners, and their children. As the buses rolled through the camp gates, Greta saw rows of wooden barracks, guard towers at each corner, barbed wire fences marking the perimeter. Her stomach tightened. This was it. This was where they would face whatever punishment America had planned. The buses stopped in front of the main administration building. An American officer stood waiting, clipboard in hand. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and a tired expression. When he spoke, his voice was firm but not harsh. "You will be processed. You will be assigned barracks. You will follow camp rules. You are prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention, and you will be treated accordingly." The women didn't know what that meant. Geneva Convention? Treated accordingly? They only knew what they'd been told. That Americans were merciless, that prisoners would suffer, that mothers might lose their children. As they filed off the buses, Greta noticed something strange. Several American soldiers were watching the children with expressions that weren't cold or cruel. They looked concerned. One soldier, young, maybe 20, smiled at a little boy holding his mother's hand. The boy smiled back, hesitant but curious. Greta didn't know what to make of it. She held Emma close and prepared for the worst. The first shock came during processing. The women were led into a large building where American nurses waited. The nurses wore white uniforms and calm expressions. They didn't shout. They didn't grab. They spoke softly, even when the women didn't understand English. One nurse approached Greta and Emma. She knelt down to Emma's eye level and smiled. "Hello, sweetheart," she said in English. Emma hid behind Greta's leg. The nurse looked up at Greta and switched to halting German. "Your daughter... sick? Fever?" Greta hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, on the ship. She had fever." The nurse's expression shifted to concern. Genuine concern, not the cold efficiency Greta had expected. "Come. Doctor, see her." Greta's heart pounded. Was this a trick? Would they take Emma away? But the nurse's hand on her shoulder was gentle, guiding, not forcing. They walked to a medical station where an American military doctor waited. The doctor examined Emma carefully, listening to her chest with a stethoscope, checking her throat, feeling her forehead. He spoke in English to the nurse, then turned to Greta with a reassuring smile. "She'll be fine," the nurse translated. "Just exhausted. We give medicine. Good food. She get better." The nurse handed Greta a small bottle of liquid medicine and demonstrated the dosage. Then she gave Emma a piece of candy. Real candy, wrapped in colorful paper. Emma's eyes went wide. She looked at her mother for permission. Greta nodded, stunned. Emma unwrapped the candy and popped it in her mouth. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile Greta had seen in weeks. The nurse laughed softly and ruffled Emma's hair. Greta felt her throat tighten. This wasn't what she'd expected. Not at all. The medical care continued throughout the day. Every child was examined. Those with fevers got medicine. Those with lice got treatment. Those with malnutrition got vitamin supplements. The American doctors and nurses moved through the children with patience and care, speaking softly, offering smiles, trying to make the frightened little ones feel safe. One mother broke down crying when the nurse cleaned her son's infected cut and bandaged it carefully. "You're helping him," she whispered in German. I thought you would hurt us." The nurse didn't understand the words, but she understood the tears. She squeezed the mother's hand gently and nodded. After medical processing, the women were led to the showers. Greta's stomach clenched again. This was another moment she'd feared. Forced nakedness, humiliation, degradation. But when they entered the shower building, they found clean tile floors, private stalls with curtains, hooks for clothing, and stacks of towels. An older German-speaking guard explained the process. "You shower. Clean clothes after. Your children can shower with you. Take your time. The water is hot." Hot water. Greta almost didn't believe it. She undressed Emma carefully, then herself, and stepped into the stall. When she turned the knob, hot water streamed down, washing away weeks of grime, sweat, and fear. Emma giggled as the water ran over her face. Greta closed her eyes and felt tears mixing with the shower spray. For months they'd bathed in cold water from buckets, if at all. This was luxury. This was dignity. From the enemy. The mess hall was the second major shock. The women and children were led into a long building with rows of tables. The smell hit them first. Warm food, real food, cooking in large quantities. Greta's mouth watered involuntarily. They lined up, each person receiving a metal tray. American cooks served the food: mashed potatoes, green beans, chicken, fresh bread, butter, milk, milk. Real milk, cold and white, poured into glasses. Emma stared at her plate in amazement. "Mama, is this for us?" "Yes," Greta whispered, hardly believing it herself. They sat at a table with other mothers and children. For a moment, no one ate. They just stared at the food, as if waiting for someone to take it away or tell them it was a mistake. Then a little boy across the table grabbed a piece of bread and bit into it. His mother gasped, but didn't stop him. The boy's eyes went wide, and he started eating faster. That broke the spell. Children began eating, and mothers followed, tears streaming down many faces. Greta cut the chicken into small pieces for Emma, who devoured it hungrily. Greta herself ate slowly, each bite almost painful in its richness. In Germany, they'd survived on thin soup, black bread, sometimes nothing at all. Here was a feast. An American guard walked through the mess hall, observing. He stopped near Greta's table and watched the children eating. His expression was soft, almost sad. When he caught Greta looking at him, he smiled slightly and nodded as if to say, "It's okay. Eat." After the meal, the women were stunned into silence. They gathered outside the mess hall, holding their children, trying to process what had just happened. One woman spoke what they were all thinking. "They feed us better than our own country did." The barracks were simple but clean. Each family unit, mother and children, was assigned a section with bunk beds, thin mattresses, clean sheets, and wool blankets. The buildings had windows with screens to keep out mosquitoes, wooden floors swept clean, and small stoves for heat in winter. Greta and Emma were assigned beds near a window. Emma immediately climbed onto the bottom bunk and bounced a little, testing it. She looked at Greta with wonder. "It's soft, Mama." Greta sat beside her daughter and pulled her close. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building. They were safe. They were clean. They were fed. And no one had hurt them. That evening, as the women settled their children for bed, an American soldier appeared at the barracks door. He was young, maybe 25, with red hair and freckles. He carried a large cardboard box. The women tensed immediately. What now? What did he want? The soldier spoke in English, but his tone was gentle. A German-speaking woman near the door translated. "He says he has gifts for the children." Gifts? The women exchanged confused glances. The soldier opened the box and began pulling out teddy bears, soft, brown, with button eyes and stitched smiles. He moved through the barracks, offering one to each child. Emma reached out hesitantly, then grabbed the bear and hugged it to her chest. She looked up at the soldier with wide eyes. "Danke," she whispered. "Thank you." The soldier smiled and ruffled her hair, the same gesture the nurse had made earlier. Then he moved to the next child, and the next, until every child in the barracks had a teddy bear. When he left, the barracks was silent except for the soft sounds of children hugging their new toys. Then one mother began crying. Another joined her. Soon half the women were weeping quietly, holding their children, overwhelmed by the impossible kindness of the enemy. That night, Greta lay in her bunk with Emma curled beside her, clutching the teddy bear. She stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. She had been prepared for cruelty. She had steeled herself for separation, for punishment, for the brutal revenge she'd been told Americans would take on German women. Instead, they'd given her daughter medicine, hot water, chicken, milk, and a teddy bear. It didn't make sense, and yet it was undeniably real. In the darkness, another mother whispered from a nearby bunk. "What kind of enemy is this?" No one had an answer. The days at Camp Como settled into a rhythm, and it was nothing like the women had expected. Each morning began with a wake-up bell at 7 o'clock. Mothers dressed their children and walked them to the mess hall for breakfast: oatmeal or eggs, toast with jam, orange juice, milk. The children adapted quickly, their bodies responding to regular meals, their faces filling out, their energy returning. Emma started running again, playing with other children outside the barracks. Greta watched her daughter laugh and chase a ball and felt a painful mix of relief and guilt. How could Emma be thriving here in captivity when children back in Germany were starving? After breakfast, the women were assigned work duties: light labor, nothing harsh. Some worked in the camp kitchen, preparing meals. Others did laundry or cleaned facilities. A few helped in the camp gardens, growing vegetables. They were paid in camp scrip, small amounts they could spend at the canteen. The camp had set up a makeshift school for the children. An American teacher who spoke some German taught basic lessons: numbers, letters, simple English phrases. The children sat at small desks, and the teacher was patient, kind, never raising her voice. Emma came back from school one day singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" in English. Greta listened, astonished, as her daughter pronounced the foreign words carefully, proudly. When had Emma stopped being afraid? The canteen became a place of wonder for the children. With the scrip their mothers earned, they could buy candy, small toys, coloring books, even ice cream on hot days. Ice cream. In the middle of captivity. In the middle of war. The first time Greta bought Emma an ice cream cone, the little girl held it carefully, licking slowly, savoring every taste. "It's so cold, Mama, and so sweet." Greta watched her daughter's joy and felt her heart twist. Back home, children were eating potato peels. Here, her daughter ate ice cream. The contradiction was almost unbearable. The American soldiers often stopped to talk to the children. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate. Smiles, gestures, shared laughter. One soldier, a big man from Texas, started bringing his harmonica to play songs during the evening. Children gathered around him, clapping along, learning to sing "You Are My Sunshine" in broken English. Greta watched these interactions with growing confusion. These were the monsters? These were the brutal enemies who supposedly hated Germans? They seemed more like uncles, neighbors, normal men who missed their own families back home. Then the letters started arriving. The Red Cross had set up a mail system, and slowly messages from Germany trickled into the camp. Greta received her first letter 6 weeks after arriving. It was from her mother in Munich. She opened it with trembling hands and read, "My dearest Greta, I pray this reaches you and that you and Emma are alive. Munich is destroyed. Our apartment building is gone. We live in the cellar of what remains. Food is almost impossible to find. We eat whatever we can scavenge. Your brother died last month. Starvation and illness. I am weak, but I survive. Please, if you can, if the Americans allow it, send help. We are desperate. Your loving mother." Greta read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Her brother, dead. Her mother, living in a cellar, starving. And here she sat, in America, well-fed, clean, safe. She wasn't alone. Other mothers received similar letters. They read them aloud to each other in quiet voices, sharing the grief, the guilt, the impossible situation they found themselves in. One woman's letter described children in Berlin digging through rubble for scraps of food. Another's told of a grandmother who had died of cold in the winter. The letters painted pictures of a Germany barely surviving, while here in Mississippi the prisoners lived in relative comfort. The guilt became crushing. The women stopped enjoying their meals. They ate, but mechanically, knowing every bite was more than their families had. Some tried to save food to send back, but the guards gently explained it wasn't possible. The packages would spoil, the mail system couldn't handle it. "You can write letters," one guard said through a translator. "Tell them you're safe. That's what you can give them." But what comfort was that? Knowing your mother was starving while you ate chicken and potatoes? Knowing your countrymen were dying while your daughter played with a teddy bear? Despite the guilt, moments of unexpected humanity kept breaking through. There was Sergeant Miller, a middle-aged man from Ohio who had 3 daughters back home. He started bringing picture books to the camp, handing them out to the children. He'd sit on the barrack steps and show the pictures to kids who gathered around him, telling stories in English they didn't understand but somehow still enjoyed. Emma became one of his regular visitors. "Mama, Sergeant Miller showed me a book about a rabbit," she'd report, excited. "He makes funny voices." Greta watched these interactions warily at first, protective of her daughter, but Sergeant Miller was always respectful, always kind. Once, when Emma was sad because she missed her grandmother, he gave her a small American flag pin and, through gestures in broken German, tried to tell her it would bring luck. Another soldier, Private Johnson, was younger, barely out of his teens. He was homesick himself, missing his family in Georgia. He started teaching some of the older children how to play baseball, using a stick and a ball he'd found. The children didn't understand the rules at first, but they loved running and hitting and catching. One afternoon, Greta watched Emma running the bases, laughing breathlessly while Private Johnson cheered her on. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, so impossible given the circumstances. An older mother stood beside Greta, watching the children play. "They treat us better than our own army did," she murmured. "My husband, he was in the Wehrmacht. When he was home on leave, he told me how they treated prisoners. Not like this, never like this." The camp commandant, Colonel Peterson, sometimes walked through the compound in the evenings. He was a stern-looking man, but the mothers noticed he always stopped to observe the children playing. Once a little boy kicked a ball that rolled to his feet. The colonel picked it up and kicked it back, gently. The boy giggled and ran after it. Greta was working in the camp garden one morning when Colonel Peterson stopped by to inspect. He watched her digging for a moment, then spoke in English. A translator nearby repeated his words in German. "Your daughter, Emma, yes? She's doing well?" Greta straightened, surprised. He knew her daughter's name? "Yes, sir. She is well. Thank you." The colonel nodded. "Good. Children shouldn't suffer for their parents' wars. We try to make it bearable here." He walked away before Greta could respond. She stood there, trowel in hand, trying to process his words. Children shouldn't suffer for their parents' wars. It was a sentiment that seemed obvious, humane. But coming from an enemy officer, it felt revolutionary. Occasionally, the prisoners were allowed supervised trips outside the camp, work details in nearby towns, picking cotton or helping with harvest. These excursions revealed more of American life, and each revelation deepened the women's confusion about everything they'd been taught. The first time Greta went on such a detail, she rode in a truck with 10 other women through the Mississippi countryside. They passed farms with painted barns, houses with gardens, children playing in yards. Everything was intact, peaceful, prosperous. They worked in a cotton field for several hours under the hot sun. The work was hard, but at noon the farmer's wife brought out lunch, sandwiches, lemonade, cookies. She set up a table in the shade and invited the German women to sit and eat. The farmer's wife was a large woman with a kind face and a thick southern accent. She didn't speak German, but she smiled and gestured for them to eat. When one of the younger German women started crying from exhaustion and emotion, the farmer's wife patted her shoulder and handed her an extra cookie. On the ride back to camp, the women were quiet, processing what they'd seen. America wasn't suffering. America hadn't been touched by the war's destruction. While Europe burned, America had thrived. The realization was both amazing and bitter. Another time, the prisoners were taken to a nearby town to help clean up after a storm. The townspeople watched them with curiosity, some hostile, some sympathetic. One elderly woman approached Greta while she was sweeping debris from a sidewalk. "You have children?" the woman asked, gesturing to suggest her meaning. Greta nodded. "One daughter, Emma. She is 3. The woman's expression softened. She disappeared into her house and returned with a small cloth doll. She pressed it into Greta's hands. "For your girl," she said simply. Greta stared at the doll, overwhelmed. This woman didn't know her, didn't know anything about her except that she was German, was a prisoner, was a mother, and she gave her a gift for her daughter. That night, when Greta gave Emma the doll, the little girl hugged it alongside her teddy bear. "The American lady is nice, Mama." "Yes," Greta whispered. "She is." The transformation happened slowly, like ice melting in spring. For weeks, the mothers clung to their old beliefs, their loyalty to Germany, their suspicion of Americans. They told themselves this kindness was temporary, a trick, part of some larger plan they didn't yet understand. But day after day, the kindness continued. The meals kept coming, the children kept thriving, the soldiers kept smiling. And slowly, the fortress of propaganda began to crack. Greta found herself thinking about her childhood education, the lessons about German superiority, about the weakness and cruelty of other nations. She remembered the speeches on the radio, the posters in town squares, the constant message that Germany was right and everyone else was wrong. But if that was true, why was Germany in ruins while America stood strong? Why did the enemy feed her daughter while her own country had let people starve? Why did American soldiers give children teddy bears while German soldiers had given them only propaganda and pain? These questions haunted her. They haunted all the mothers. At night, they whispered to each other in the barracks, trying to make sense of it. "Maybe," one woman said hesitantly, "maybe we were lied to. About everything." The suggestion hung in the air like heresy, but no one disagreed. The conversations grew deeper as the weeks passed. The women began sharing their true thoughts, their doubts, their guilt. It started with small admissions. "The food here is better than what I ate in Germany, even before the war. My daughter is healthier now than she was at home. The American soldiers are kinder than some German officers I knew." Then the admissions grew bolder. What if we were wrong? Or what if Germany wasn't the victim? What if the war was our fault? What if we supported something terrible without realizing it? Not everyone accepted these ideas easily. Some women resisted, defending their homeland, their husbands who had died fighting, the cause they'd believed in. Arguments broke out sometimes, voices rising in the night. "My husband gave his life for Germany. You dishonor him by saying we were wrong." "But look around. Look at what Germany did to us. Look at what America is doing for our children. Which one truly cared about us?" Greta stayed quiet during most of these debates, but privately she knew which side she believed. She wrote a letter to her mother one evening, carefully choosing her words. "Mama, we are safe here. Emma is healthy and happy. The Americans treat us with dignity. I know this is hard to understand, but I must tell you the truth. I do not fear them. They are not monsters. Perhaps we were taught lies. Perhaps the world is different than we believed. I hope you can forgive me for saying this, but I am grateful to be here rather than in Germany right now. I wish you could be here too, where there is food and safety. I pray you survive until I can return to you. Your loving daughter, Greta." The responses from Germany when they came were mixed. Some family members expressed relief that their loved ones were safe. Others wrote angry letters, accusing the prisoners of betraying Germany, of being brainwashed by American propaganda. One mother received a letter from her sister calling her a traitor for saying anything positive about America. She read it aloud to the group, her voice shaking. "You have forgotten who you are. You have forgotten what they did to us. Do not let their kindness blind you to the fact that they are our enemies." An older mother responded quietly, "But who made them our enemies? We did. Germany did. Hitler did. We chose this war. They're just ending it. The shift in thinking was profound for many of the women. They began to see themselves not as victims of American aggression, but as survivors of German mistakes. It was a painful realization, one that required them to question everything they'd believed, everyone they'd trusted. Some women couldn't make that leap. They withdrew into silence, clinging to old loyalties, refusing to let go of the beliefs they'd built their lives around. But for others, including Greta, the transformation was liberating, even as it was agonizing. She watched Emma playing with American children who lived in the nearby town during a supervised visit to a church picnic. The children didn't care about nationality or politics. They just played together, laughing and running, sharing cookies and toys. That's what the world could be, Greta thought, if adults didn't poison it with hate. The most profound transformation came from understanding why the Americans treated them this way. It wasn't just individual kindness, it was something deeper, something built into how Americans thought about the world. A Red Cross worker visited the camp to check on conditions. She was an American woman, middle-aged, with warm eyes and a patient manner. She spoke to the German mothers through a translator, asking about their needs, listening to their concerns. One mother asked the question they all wondered. "Why do you treat us so well? We are your enemies. Our country killed your soldiers." The Red Cross worker thought for a moment, then answered carefully, "You are prisoners of war, yes, but you are also mothers and children. You didn't start this war. You didn't choose this. And even if you had, we believe in treating people with dignity. It's not about what you did, it's about who we are. We believe all people deserve basic human rights, even in captivity." The translator repeated the words in German. The mothers sat in stunned silence. Basic human rights, even in captivity, even for enemies. This was a concept Germany had never taught them. The strong dominated the weak. The victors punished the losers. That was how the world worked, or so they'd thought. But here was a different philosophy. That human dignity wasn't earned through strength or victory, but was inherent, inalienable, belonging to everyone simply because they were human. Greta rolled this idea around in her mind for days. It explained so much: the hot showers, the food, the teddy bears, the medicine for children. The Americans weren't being kind to manipulate or trick them. They were being kind because they believed it was the right thing to do. The children, unburdened by ideology, adapted fastest. Emma started speaking more English than German. She made friends with American children during supervised visits. She sang American songs and drew pictures of American flags alongside German ones. One day she asked Greta innocently, "Mama, are Americans bad people?" Greta looked at her daughter, healthy, happy, safe, and realized she couldn't lie. "No, Emma, they're not bad people." "Then why were we fighting them?" It was the most important question anyone had asked, and Greta didn't have a good answer. Because our leaders told us to. Because we were confused. Because we made mistakes." "Oh." Emma thought about this, then shrugged and went back to playing with her doll and teddy bear. If only adults could be so wise, Greta thought. The climactic moment came 4 months into their captivity, on a cold November morning. Colonel Peterson called all the mothers to assemble in the camp's main building. The women gathered anxiously, children at their sides. What now? Was this the end of the kindness? Were they being separated, sent back to Germany? Colonel Peterson stood at the front of the room, looking tired but determined. He spoke in English and Browett, and the translator repeated his words. "Ladies, I have an announcement. The Red Cross has located several children who were separated from their mothers during the war's final chaos. Some were lost during evacuations. Others were placed in temporary orphanages. We have been working to reunite these children with their families. Today we have succeeded in several cases." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Lost children? Reunions? The colonel continued. "I will call out names. If your child was separated from you, please come forward." He began reading from a list. Frau Hoffmann, Frau Weber, Frau Klein. Women gasped and rushed forward, hope and fear warring on their faces. Greta watched, her heart pounding, grateful that Emma was safe beside her, but aching for the mothers who had suffered separation. Then the door at the side of the building opened and American soldiers entered, each leading a small child by the hand. The children looked scared, confused, but relatively healthy. They'd been in American care too, somewhere else, waiting for this moment. The first reunion was Frau Hoffmann and her 5-year-old son, Klaus. The boy didn't recognize his mother at first. It had been 9 months. But when she fell to her knees and called his name, something clicked. He ran to her and she wrapped him in her arms, sobbing. One by one, the reunions happened. Mothers and children who had been torn apart by war's chaos, brought back together by the enemy's care. The room filled with tears, laughter, German words of joy and disbelief. Greta stood watching, Emma's hand in hers, tears streaming down her own face. She thought of what could have been. If she and Emma had been separated, if Emma had been lost in the chaos, would the Americans have cared for her? Would they have searched for Greta? Worked to reunite them? Based on everything she'd seen, she believed they would have, and that belief shattered the last remaining fragments of her old worldview. This wasn't cruelty. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't even just mercy. This was something deeper, a fundamental belief in the value of families, of children, of human connections that transcended war and nationality. After the reunions, Colonel Peterson spoke again, his voice rough with emotion. War is terrible. It tears families apart. It destroys lives. But when we have the chance to put even one family back together, we take it. Because that's what makes us different. That's what makes us human. The translator's voice wavered as she repeated his words in German. Every woman in the room understood the weight of what had just happened. That evening, the barracks were full of quiet conversations. Women who had reunited with their children held them close, unable to let go. Others, like Greta, held their own children tighter, grateful they hadn't been separated. And slowly, inevitably, they all came to the same realization. The enemy they'd feared had proved more humane than the nation they'd served. The Americans had returned their children when Germany had failed to protect them. The conquerors had shown mercy when their own leaders had shown only cruelty. There was no going back from this truth. The transformation was complete. As 1946 arrived, word spread through the camp that repatriation would begin soon. The war had been over for months. Germany was under Allied occupation. It was time for the prisoners to go home. But home felt like a complicated word now. The women read letters from Germany describing devastation, starvation, chaos. They knew they were returning to a broken country, to families living in rubble, to a society that would need decades to rebuild. And they were returning changed. They had seen America. They had experienced a different way of life, a different set of values. They had watched their children thrive in enemy captivity while German children starved under German rule. How could they pretend that hadn't changed them? Greta lay awake many nights worrying about the return. Emma barely remembered Germany now. She spoke English fluently, played American games, sang American songs. How would she adapt back home? Would she even understand what they were returning to? Some mothers whispered that they didn't want to leave. It felt like a betrayal to admit it, but it was true. Here their children were safe, fed, healthy. There they faced uncertainty, hardship, maybe even danger. But they had no choice. They were prisoners, not immigrants. America wasn't keeping them. Germany was their home, whether they liked it or not. The day of departure came in March 1946. The mothers packed their few belongings, extra clothes provided by the Red Cross, letters from home, small gifts from American soldiers and townspeople. The children carried their teddy bears, their dolls, their picture books. Emma held her teddy bear tightly as Greta packed. "Can we come back, Mama?" Greta's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. We're going home to Germany. To your grandmother." "But I like it here." "I know, I do too." The admission surprised Greta, but it was honest. Despite everything, despite the fact that they were prisoners, that their country was defeated, that they were being held against their will, she had come to appreciate America. Not just for the food and shelter, but for what it represented. Dignity, fairness, second chances. The American soldiers lined up outside the barracks to say goodbye. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Sergeant Miller, who had read stories to the children for months, gave Emma one final picture book. "For the journey," he said in his halting German. Remember us good." Emma hugged his leg. "Thank you, Sergeant Miller. You're my friend." He patted her head, unable to speak. Private Johnson gave the children one last baseball lesson in the yard, teaching them how to properly swing the bat. "You can play this in Germany," he said. "Teach your friends. It's a good game." Even Colonel Peterson came to see them off. He shook hands with several of the mothers, including Greta. "I hope you find your families well," he said through the translator. "I hope Germany recovers. And I hope you remember that enemies can become friends if we let them." Greta nodded, unable to trust her voice. The journey back across the Atlantic was strange. The same women who had come in fear and anger now returned in confusion and sadness. They mourned the loss of safety, the loss of abundance, even the loss of their captors' kindness. When they arrived in Germany, the reality hit them like a physical blow. Bremerhaven was even more destroyed than when they'd left. The processing center was chaotic, overwhelmed with displaced persons and returning prisoners. Food was scarce. Officials were overworked and indifferent. The contrast with America was stark and painful. This was home. This was what they'd been loyal to. And it was broken beyond recognition. Greta and Emma made their way to Munich by train and truck, a journey that took days through ruined landscapes. When they finally reached what had been their neighborhood, Greta barely recognized it. Entire blocks were gone. Rubble filled the streets. People looked like ghosts, thin, pale, desperate. They found Greta's mother in a basement room she shared with 3 other families. The old woman looked 20 years older than when Greta had last seen her. When she saw Greta and Emma, she wept. You're alive. You're both alive. And Emma, she looks so healthy. Greta felt a fresh wave of guilt. Yes, Emma was healthy. Because America had fed her. Because the enemy had cared for her better than her own country had. Over the following weeks, Greta helped her mother survive, sharing the food they could scavenge, trading the clothes the Red Cross had given them for bread and coal. Emma struggled to adjust, constantly asking when they would go back to America, not understanding that America had never been their home. But slowly life found a rhythm. Germany began to recover, inch by painful inch. American aid started flowing in. The Marshall Plan, they called it. The same country that had bombed Germany was now helping rebuild it. The same soldiers who had been enemies were now handing out food and medicine. Greta watched this with deep emotions. The Americans were staying consistent with their values, treating people with dignity, helping even their former enemies, choosing mercy over revenge. Years passed, Germany slowly rebuilt. Greta found work, then remarried. Emma grew up, attended school, became a young woman. She never forgot her time in America, never lost the teddy bear Sergeant Miller had given her. In 1962, when Emma was 20 years old, she asked Greta about the war, about the captivity, about America. They sat in their small apartment in rebuilt Munich, drinking coffee, and Greta finally told her daughter the full truth. "I was terrified when we went to America," Greta said. "I thought they would hurt us, hurt you. I thought we would suffer terribly." "But we didn't," Emma said softly. "They were kind to us." "Yes. And that kindness changed me. It showed me that everything I'd been taught about the world was wrong. Germany wasn't superior. America wasn't evil. We had been the aggressors, and they showed us mercy anyway." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Do you think that's why Germany recovered? Because they helped us instead of destroying us?" Greta smiled. Her daughter had grown into a wise woman. "Yes, I think exactly that. They showed us a better way, and slowly we learned it." Emma still had the teddy bear on her shelf. Sometimes she looked at it and remembered the young American soldier with red hair who had given it to her. She wondered where he was now, if he remembered the frightened German children he'd comforted, if he knew how much that simple gesture had meant. She hoped he did. She hoped he knew that his kindness had mattered, that it had changed lives, that it had helped heal wounds deeper than any bomb could create. And so the teddy bear became more than just a toy. It became a symbol of what humanity can be, even in the darkest times. Those German mothers went to America expecting beatings and got hot showers instead. They expected their children to be torn away and got them returned when they were lost. They expected cruelty and got dignity. The paradox was almost unbearable. The enemy was more humane than their own nation. The conquerors showed more mercy than their own leaders. The Americans didn't just defeat Germany militarily. They defeated German ideology with something far more powerful than weapons. They defeated it with kindness. For Greta Schmidt and the other mothers at Camp Como, Mississippi, those months of captivity became the most important education of their lives. They learned that enemies are not born but made, that hatred can be unlearned, that even after terrible conflict, humanity can persist, that sometimes the hardest truths come from the most unlikely sources. As Greta told her daughter years later, "They gave us food when we expected starvation. They gave us shelter when we expected punishment. They returned our children when we expected separation. And in doing so, they taught us something more valuable than any victory, that mercy is stronger than revenge, that dignity is more powerful than domination, and that the truest strength is shown not in how you defeat your enemies, but in how you treat them afterward." That is the story worth remembering. The story of German mothers who expected the worst from America and received something they never imagined: respect, care, and the safe return of their children. It's a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, we have the capacity to choose compassion over cruelty. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories from World War II. These accounts remind us that history is not just about battles and politics, it's about people, about choices, about the moments when humanity shines through even the deepest darkness. Thank you for watching, and remember, the past has lessons for us if we're willing to learn them.